The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University.
Hi, it is a great honor for us to welcome Minister Janawi, the former foreign minister of Tunisia, who is also the ambassador to Ukraine and Russia. And it is a great honor for us. You are our first guest on International Insights, and welcome to Alabama. So if you're going to introduce Tunisia to the West and to American audiences, what would you present? How would you introduce Tunisia to America?
Introduce Tunisia or myself?
Both, actually.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me in the show. It's an honor for me to be your first guest. Well, I am a career diplomat, retired after 42 years serving the Tunisian diplomatic service. I've been in different countries, serving my country in India and South Korea and London as ambassador and Moscow, Ukraine. And now I am heading a young Tunisian think tank called the Tunisian Council for International Relations. Well, about Tunisia, I don't think it has to be introduced. This is the most north country in Africa. It's it's 164,000 square meters area. It has a population of 12 million. It is the closest country to Europe. It's around 300 miles from Tunis, Rome, and 2 hours flight to any European capital. So we are, on the top of the African continent, but the closest country to Europe.
Fantastic. Minister, thank you very much for introducing yourself that way. Now, few people in our audience understand that the United States and Tunisia have a long history together. How is the United States viewed in Tunisia and indeed in Africa in general?
Well, we have, I think, Tunisia has the longest history with the United States since the United States independence. In 1799, we concluded Tunisia and the United States under President John Adams in 1800, the first agreement, trade and friendship agreement. And since then, our relation increased and developed to both country interests. So we have been close, and the United States has been always, a close partner for Tunisia. We were very close before gaining our independence because the United States helped Tunisia, particularly within the United Nations, advocating its case in the international arena and supported Tunisia independence. It was one of the major powers countries to recognize the independence of Tunisia, and the United States was also massively present since our independence, helping Tunisia, establishing its new state, starting its development plans, and since then we have been partners and a good ally. Since 2011, the United States was a staunch supporter of the Tunisian aspiration for democracy. The US Congress, make a standing ovation when Tunisia made its own revolution. And since then, the United States, supported and granted Tunisia a number of support, particularly on security field, where it helped, our forces getting better trained, better equipped to face the threat of terrorism, which was a major threat for the new young democracy in this country.
Excellent. What was Tunisia's place in the Arab Spring? You know, the Arab Spring was this very profound moment in global history, and particularly for the region. And why is this important for Africa, in particular for democracies within Africa?
Well, the Arab Spring, what has been called the Arab Spring by the media, started in this country for a simple reason that Tunisia had the major ingredients for, for transformation towards a nascent democracy. And from Tunisia, it spread all over North Africa and the Middle East, and of course, Sub-Saharan Africa, to Sub-Saharan Africa. Aspiration for democracy was, a very important aspiration of the people of this region, which wanted, to get rid of autocratic regimes and start a new political system where people have more say on the public life and where there are more opportunities for economic development. Well, some of these countries succeeded. Unfortunately, few of them, instead of developing democracy, went to civil war and were not, successful in establishing, new working institution, democratic institution. And some of them, including in Sub-Saharan Africa, were able now to be, a nascent, democratic countries. Tunisia was from 2014 to 2020 was the first free country according to international, particularly the Economist Index and the Freedom House Index, responding to major criteria for a free country.
Fantastic. Minister Janawi, in February of last year, the world really changed quite dramatically. Moscow invaded Ukraine, and a new war was in Europe. So, but few people examine how the war in Ukraine has actually affected the African continent in general and Tunisia in specific. And what are your concerns about the conflict? And then if you could take a crystal ball in front of you for 1 second, how do you see the conflict ending?
Well, this is a very big, important question. But Tunisia was, of course, as an African country, and most of the continent was, affected directly by that war, because for a simple reason that two major products highly consumed in this part of the world were imported from either Ukraine or from Russia. So we were big importers of Russian cereals, Russian and Ukrainian cereals, as many other MENA countries and sub-Saharan African countries. So we were directly affected by what happens there, and particularly by the embargo, which was initially put on the export of the cereals from the Ukrainian Odessa port. Then, after the liberation of the exportation from that port, things went better. But unfortunately now there are negotiations going on in order to renew that agreement brokered by the UN and Turkey with Russia and Ukraine. The second product, which was, affected a lot the economic situation in Tunisia, of course, was energy, because we are an important energy importer. We are importing energy not from Russia, but all from different parts of the world. But that war increased, particularly in the beginning, the prices of energy and oil. That had an effect directly on our public finance, because we, in our national budget, we expected that the price would not increase above $75. In the beginning, it went, you remember, almost to $100 a barrel. And that affected, the situation, the economic situation, particularly that the whole region and Africa in general, we were getting out of another major problem, which is the pandemic, which had its own, impact on the economy. So inflation went high, and the purchasing power of people went down, and people felt directly the impact of the war on their daily life. And still, till now, we are living, the impact of that war, particularly on the rate of inflation, which has been increasing a lot because it affected not only oil and food products, but also other, products related to energy and related to food importation. Now, the second part of your question, how this war will end, nobody is able today to tell you because we are in the middle, of the war. There is a counter-offensive from Ukraine, against Russian intervention. We don't know what will be the result of that counter-offensive. You've been witnessing and watching what is going on inside Russia itself. So the whole world is watching the development of that situation. But anyway, I am sure, being, a former diplomat, that at the end, all these people have to sit around the table and to find a kind of compromise where to end the war, because Russia is going to continue to be a major power in the part of the world, and it is going to have its own say in its relation with Europe and the rest of the world. And so one day, both parties, Ukraine and Russia, but also the world and Russia, have a major interest to sit together and find a way where the rights of the Ukrainian should be, safeguarded, but also peace will be reestablished in the region.
Now, Minister, if I could follow up for 1 second, a lot of African presidents from African countries came to St. Petersburg, and they met with Putin, and before that they had met with Zelensky, and they had a peace proposal to try to resolve the conflict. What do you think is the continent of Africa's place in helping to resolve this conflict?
Well, this is not the first visit made by the African head of states, few of them representing Africa. In June 2022, they went to Russia and to Ukraine. They met both parties. And now they went back, having contacts with President Putin and President Zelensky. The idea is Africa, as the rest of the world, is interested to see that war, ending. And the idea is to help push towards, a settlement of the conflict, an end of the conflict. Are they successful or not? It's too early to say, but I think it's one of the initiatives. There are many other countries which could, China, one of them. They presented, a kind of initiative. Turkey, but now it's up to the two major, conflict partners, and Europe and the West and Russia, to see how to find a way to get out of that conflict.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm going to follow that up by asking, how has Africa changed in the past decade? Are African states becoming greater protagonists in global affairs now than in the past?
Well, Africa today is subject of fierce competition. It's very obvious that major powers, including middle ones, I mean medium powers, they are having a special interest in Africa. You've seen, of course, Europe for obvious historical reason, the United States, but also you have a new competitor, a major competitor, China, which is a major investor now and credit lenders to Africa. It owns one of the, I think, the biggest part of the credit of the debt, to Africa. It's the largest investor in infrastructure, but also we have Russia, which has been very active now in Africa, by selling arms, which is the first, arm exporter to Africa, but also through Wagner Group, which is present in some country, particularly in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in the Sahel countries, but also in Mozambique and even to other southern and middle, African countries. So you add to this, of course, the European, they have their annual summit with Africa. So Africa is being, targeted for the opportunities it offers. This is a continent which is going to represent by 2050 the quarter of the world population.
Yes.
It has the largest free trade area now in the world, 1.2 billion consumer. And it has, despite the debt charge, which has been tripled in the last 10 years, there are many African economies which showed resilience in having growth, substantial growth rate. So there are plenty of opportunities, but also, unfortunately, Africa is a host of major security problems. Around 15, conflicts are going on in Africa. It's the largest number of conflicts in the world. There are around 20 peacekeeping, operation going on in that part of the world. 8 of those conflicts, they are very intensive and active conflicts. So Africa also is being on the top of the agenda of the world because of the conflict and security risk it represents to itself, but also to the rest of the world.
Now, I want to follow up with that a little bit because during the Cold War, we saw Africa being a central part of the power competition between the Soviet Union and the United States. Are we starting to see a return to that in the current period? You talked about Wagner being very involved in terms of minerals, in terms of security risks on the African continent. How does Africa balance the great power competition between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing now as Africa is growing in terms of importance and there's increasing competition over the continent of Africa?
I think what is going on now is not the competition going on is not on ideological basis, which was the case under the Cold War. I mean, when the Soviet Union and the West were in confrontation at that time. What is going on now is countries looking individually for their own interest and trying to grasp, the opportunities of Africa offers, and instead of, trying to respond to the priorities of the African continent, particularly for development and, education, climate change, you see that the different agendas differs from one country to another. So it's not the same competition which was there under the Cold War. It's a new kind of competition where every country is looking for its own interest. And if you have followed what was going on just last week in Paris in that summit about the financial, new pact for financial for financial cooperation in the world, you have seen a lot of, particularly from African countries, which were very eloquent, asking to have their own say on global affairs, particularly, asking for membership in the Security Council, where Africa being, as I said, almost an important 25% of the General Assembly of the United Nations are Africa, coming from Africa. So, but Africa is not a permanent number. It has no say on the security and peace in the world. So African countries, they are claiming, to have their own seats in major organizations, particularly also now on the development and financial Bretton Woods organization, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank. They wanted to have more, vocal presence, in these institutions, and in order to serve their own interest for development and security.
Excellent. I would like to turn a little bit to the security of Tunisia and look at Libya. With the Arab Spring and the conflicts that occurred in many countries, Libya is very close geographically and presents very specific security risks to Tunisia. Can you tell us about Libya and how Libya is perceived within Tunisia, and if you could describe the conflict and what you think the outcome of that will be?
Well, Libya is one. This is another country, which witnessed major transformation at what the Arab Spring. Unfortunately, Libya has been the last 12 years witnessing a kind of quite civil war between the East and the West. It has two governments. Every government, each of them, they are claiming, to control the whole country. There are plenty of militia, in all parts of the country. Militia well equipped, and those militia, they are acting out of the government control, both government control. So they have their own, say on the security of the country. So this is a major. It's an important spot for insecurity in Libya, but also in the neighborhood. Tunisia having, a common border with Libya, around 500 kilometers border. So it is impacted directly by the situation in that country from the security point of view, but also from the economic point of view, because in the last 50 years, we had strong economic relation between Tunisia and Libya was the first Tunisian export market for Tunisian products. So since then, since 2011, most of that has collapsed, and it had its own impact on our labor situation here and employment, and all those people who were working in Libya, they went back to Tunis, and Libya and Tunisia, they are very strongly linked with each other. Anything happen from the security point of view in Libya has its own impact on Tunisia, and vice versa. Also on the economic side, Libya being the first foreign partner of Tunisia. We were, before 2011, we used to export around 1.5 billion US dollars, goods to Libya. All of that has almost disappeared since 2011 because there is no central government with whom we can interact, to develop, our trade relation, particularly in the early years after 2011. Now, of course, there is a government which is recognized by the United Nations, with which we are trying to develop, a different kind of cooperation. But still, the political situation in Libya is still unstable, and the United Nations is not yet able to find a final settlement to that conflict, where there will be an elected government recognized by the whole Libyans, having control on the whole territory. That it's still in the process. It's worked on by the UN envoy, but in the meantime, unfortunately, Libya is a kind of theater of different groups, coming from Russia with Wagner Group, but also from Sudan, from Chad, and from other countries, and from Turkey also. And they are supporting different factions. And that situation is impacting directly on Tunisia and, of course, on all the neighborhood within this part of the world.
So, Minister, I'd like to ask you, we're running a little shorter on time, but I'd like to ask you very briefly, is there something that's important that I think audiences should know about Tunisia or Africa in general that just isn't known, isn't well known or understood?
Well, for Tunisia first, this is a country which has been always an open country, ready for dialogue and willing, to compromise. So this country, it's a melting pot. Across its history, it has been, it assimilated different conquerors who came, making war in this country, but prefer to settle down and mix with the local population. So the fabric of the Tunisian society is we are a Muslim Arab society since the 7th century, but we have a very strong history going back 3,000 years, where Tunisia used to be, a kind of a major power with Carthage, with Hannibal, conquering the Alps and Europe on that time, and being, arch enemy of Rome, which occupied Tunisia and Carthage for almost 6th century. So this is a country which is open for dialogue, which is willing to develop its relation with different partners of the world, which is the case today, and the United States being one of the major important partners of Tunisia, which bet on the Tunisian democratic process, and we are willing to develop and expand our relation with the United States in that regard. Now, Africa is young also. By the way, the name of Africa came from Tunisia itself. We gave Africa its own name, Africa, because we were considered by the Roman Empire as Africa. And since then, the term Africa, expanded to the whole continent. Africa is a young, developing continent. It has very important potential. It needs cooperation with different parts of the world, particularly with the United States, to develop its infrastructure, to develop its research and development, because unfortunately till now it continues to export the extracted minerals and import goods. This is not good for development of the continent. So this is a country, a continent which needs a lot of support to develop its education system, its research and development network. It has, as I said, the largest free trade area now in the world, and it's one of the most important, from population point of view, in the world. It's going to represent the quota of the world population in 2050. So it needs the focus of the rest of the world to develop and to expand its, ambition to become a major player in the world.
Minister Jinawi, I want to thank you for joining us today. It was a truly great pleasure for both of us to talk to you today. and to host you as the first guest of this program. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope you can join us again soon.